Welcome to today's edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast. Who suffers most from the violent crime wave that's sweeping the nation? I'm going to talk about that next.
Redeemed, rehabilitated, and real entertaining. This is the Carl Jackson Podcast.
Welcome to today's edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast. I'm glad you can join me. Be sure to subscribe, like, share my page, even review my page. You can find it everywhere podcasts are found. This podcast, everywhere podcasts are found. Apple, Google, Spotify, sometimes on YouTube, but definitely on Rumble. Also, SalemPodcastNetwork.com is a great place to get the podcast, and it has an array of, we have an array of talent on the Salem Podcast Network. So SalemPodcastNetwork.com, you can find my podcast as well as other podcasts I'm sure that you would enjoy listening to. All right, so here's what I want to get into today. I was thinking about the New York City shooter or the alleged shooter. This guy, Frank James, or allegedly that shot up the people in the rail station or the subway station, Brooklyn subway station yesterday. And I honestly couldn't help but to think, who does crime affect the most? Now, yesterday, obviously, that was an aberration. That is something different. I know we always hear of mass shootings on TV, but if we were to really talk about the amount of times that firearms are used to save lives, we will be talking about or giving you those stories literally every 10 seconds or so, because firearms are used much more frequently to save lives and to stop crime. Yesterday was an aberration, but the alleged shooter happens to be a black man. You look at some of his social media posts, and it really seems like the guy was on the FBI's radar. It was coming, but I want to go back to the regular, average, everyday American citizen that happens to be black in America. And the rising crime wave overwhelmingly affects black Americans. Black Americans tend to be the victims of violent crime far more than any other people group. Not only the victims, but also the perpetrators. And I fear that if we don't start getting real about this issue in the black community, it is only going to get worse, and it is going to spiral out of control. You can call police racist all day long. I'm going to go into some stats here. You can say America is systemically racist all day long, but the fact of the matter is, as long as we're killing each other, the rest of that stuff is irrelevant. And quite frankly, we look at these situations like George Floyd and Derek Chauvin, and there's such a huge spotlight put on topics like that. And police brutality like that, even though I frankly don't believe that was police brutality. I know I'm a lone ranger on this issue. I personally believe that George Floyd had fentanyl in his system. You look at the facts and the stats on the death rate when it comes to people that even come in contact with fentanyl. In my opinion, George Floyd was going to die that day. I believe that Derek Chauvin was just stupid and didn't pay enough attention to what was going on, maybe didn't assess the situation properly, and as a result, unfortunate for him, he's going to spend a lot of time in prison for making a very stupid decision by sitting on a man who, in my opinion, was more than likely going to die anyway of a fentanyl overdose that day. That isn't to minimize George Floyd's life, but let's be honest, the guy was a thug and living a life that was bound to send him to the grave unless something miraculous were to happen, perhaps that day, where he got right with God, unaddicted to drugs, so on, etc. But anyway, all right, let's go to the stats. This hat tip to the Daily Signal for producing some of these stats that actually come from a federal crime database. And so I want to give you the numbers. Talking numbers aren't always sexy, and I don't want black people. I was convicted one day by a caller that called into the radio show when it was Larry Elder's show, and I was sitting in for him last summer, and he said part of the problem I have with black conservatives talking about this issue is that you guys make it seem like all black people are bad. And obviously, all black people aren't bad. So I do want to make sure that when we talk about crime, element of criminals in any people group, whether it's black, whether it's white, Asian, Latino. The criminal element always represents a very small minority of any people group. All right. So I think that is a fair, I think that was a fair point for the gentleman to make, and I want to make sure that that I just put that out there, if you will. All right. But I also want to give you the facts so that we understand. We can cry racism all day long, but if we don't heal our own black community, none of that stuff matters. No one is hurting black people as much as black people are hurting black people. All right. So blacks, again, are overwhelmingly the victims and the perpetrators of crime. For other racial groups, the numbers are either decreasing. So this is in the case of both white victims and offenders. Those numbers are decreasing and increasing by much smaller amounts, or basically holding constant. So here's some of the crime by the numbers. So violent crime has skyrocketed. This is according to the federal crime data. So listen to these stats. The number of violent crimes has increased by almost 100% over the last 10 years. In 2011, the FBI reported that there were 314,907 violent offenses. In 2020, that number is 640,000. That's more than doubled. And actually, I'm going to give you an alarming stat a little later on in this podcast. So again, think about that. In 2011, 10-year stats, basically, the FBI reported 314,907 violent offenses across the nation. In 2020, there were 640,836. This, again, according to the federal crime data. So now, here's homicide. Homicide has tripled. This is the most alarming of all. So homicides, or reported homicides, tripled from 3,549 offenses in 2011 to 10,440 offenses in 2020. So someone shot, killed, murdered somehow. So you've seen those numbers triple. 3,549 in 2011, up to 10,444 in 2020. And this is what the most recent stats are now up to 2020. So that's why I'm going by these numbers. So let me read something to you. The numbers I'm citing are likely even worse. So again, the numbers that I just told you when it comes to homicide, 3,549 homicides, 2011, 10,440 in 2020, the year that we have the most recent stats available to us. But the numbers, unfortunately, are likely far more worse. That was the news that I wanted to bring you. The numbers are likely far more worse. Why? Because the FBI's data is incomplete. Why? Okay, I'm glad you asked. It relies on local law enforcement agencies across the country to voluntarily share their local data with the FBI, and not all do. And quite frankly, I don't blame them. You don't want to be called. The police officers have to do their job. I fear that what the federal government wants to do is have a federal control or federal takeover of our local police departments, our local sheriffs. This is why local sheriffs are really important. Now, some of you out there, you social justice warriors, or those of you that vote Democrat, you might be saying, this is a good thing. This is a good thing. Okay, let's pretend like, all right, I'm sure you hate Trump. So let's pretend like Trump is in office. If Trump wanted to federalize all local police, you guys would be terrified because and then you would be saying, hey, the big bad orange man is going to come for me using local police officers. All right. So if you disagree with me, just pretend like you're thinking about Trump, and then you'll agree with me. Local police officers or local police departments should not be federalized. The accountability should come within the community. These police officers, local police officers, know their community. People at the federal level do not. This is why crime is going to continue to surge in New York, because Democrats elected a bad mayor because he was a black man, a social justice warrior. So as a result of voting stupidly, yet again, New York City residents are going to pay the price for voting for Mayor for Mayor Eric Adams, because one of his solutions, at least, to solving crime or stopping or deterring crime is begging the federal government for money and for more resources. Mayor Eric Adams, if you could not handle the crime issues that you have in New York City, you should step aside, or you shouldn't have run in the first place, but you should step aside and let someone who is going to take on crime handle it. Perhaps call Mayor Rudy Giuliani, since he got it under control. I don't even like Bloomberg, but obviously Bloomberg did a good job actually when it came to crime. So maybe call him. But what you're doing is not working, and it's not going to work. All right, listen to this. In 2020, nearly 3,000, law enforcement agencies around the country, they opted not to send their FBI, send the FBI their crime data, basically. So that leaves 14.8% of law enforcement agencies and the crimes committed in their respective jurisdictions unaccounted for in the National Incident-Based Reporting System is what it's called. All right, so homicides were likely double than the report indicated. So if I tell you that there were 10,440 homicides in 2020, what this thing is saying that what this study is indicating, that it's likely homicides were over 21,000, actually closer to 22. Closer to 21,750 is likely the number of the amount of homicides that were committed in 2020 alone. That is staggering. All right, the most types of crimes have doubled in that period of time. The raw numbers are the upward trend is pretty disturbing for most violent crimes. And these crimes, what do they include? I believe it's rape, murder, theft, or battery, assault. Anyway, we'll get to that. I know it's somewhere in this report. All right. So again, most types of crimes have doubled. The number of cops being murdered is absolutely staggering. And this is going to have some serious consequences on the black community. If you go inside of the hood, people know cops, typically, or know the cops that are around. Obviously, the bad guys, the criminals in the street hate the cops. There's always some crackhead or some knucklehead. Hey, I hate the cops. All cops are racist. All cops are pigs. Yeah, you are going to see that in the hood. You're going to see that, I think, now with the proliferation of Black Lives Matter and all these woke white people. You're going to see that in the suburbs. You're going to hear that and you're going to see that. But the people that are actually more likely to be the victims of crime, blacks and minorities living in blue cities run by Democrats, are more than likely going to be the victims of crime. And if they're the victims of crime, those that tend to be or have a higher proclivity to be a victim of a crime are going to tell you they want more police around. They want good police. They want better standards. They want better training. They want nice cops, but they also want bad behind cops when the cops need to be bad. They want them to take out the criminals, and they don't want the criminals released and put back into their society, because they're the ones that have to go to the store or worry about, walking to their front door, at night, being attacked on, etc. They don't want to have to deal with that gang violence, drug dealing, so on, etc. They don't want to have to deal with that. Law-abiding citizens do not want to have to deal with the criminal element. So this number, when it comes to cops, is particularly disturbing to me because, again, we know that black people are the ones who suffer the most. And I will get into some of the detail, the stats as far as that is concerned just shortly. All right, so here's the majority of the types of crime that occurred in 2020. The increase in crime, though drastic, has not been steady over the course of the past decade. America witnessed much larger spikes. Okay, so much larger spikes the majority of the crime spike occurred in 2020. So that was the George Floyd riots, Black Lives Matter riots. The world went crazy. The United States went crazy. Blue cities across the country, American cities, just being torn up, being set ablaze. You guys remember the CHOP in Seattle, where these knuckleheads formed their own little city in the middle of the city. It was absolutely insane, and the police officers out there could not do much about it because you had a totally woke mayor out there. All right, so here's who suffers. Here's who suffers from these from the crimes. Oh, here's what I wanted to share too. When it comes to cops, this is why it's so dangerous. Actually, I did share that a little bit, but cops being murdered. First off, you're going to get fewer people that want to become cops. All right, so cops go where the crime is. All right, the overwhelming amount of crime, whether you like it or not, tends to be in the hood, tends to be in communities where that are made up, where the residents are, the majority are black, Latino, some type of minority, gangs, drugs, so on, etc. That's just a fact. All right, that's just a reality. We can do things about that, but maybe I'll talk about that. Actually, I will talk about that on my radio show tonight for the Salem Radio Network. So now, who suffers? Who suffers? Blacks suffer. Cops are dying. Cops are being killed. Fewer people are going to become cops. That means there's going to be even less policing in these black and urban communities, which means there's going to be more crime victims. There's going to be more black on black crime. That's just a reality. Again, vast majority of blacks, 90 something percent, 90 something percent of blacks, law abiding citizens, doing their things, just trying to hustle and make a living. A very small percentage, a very small element of blacks or committing the crime. And that's the same is true for any ethnic group across the country. All right, so although the national incident-based reporting system is not complete, it provides useful insights into who suffers from and who commits crime because it tracks demographic data about both sets of people. So according to this study, they say we utilize the FBI's crime data to compare victim statistics to determine which groups have been most impacted by the rise in violent crime, factoring out the cases in which the race of the victim was unknown. They say we calculated who has borne the brunt of the crime wave. All right. So now, here are some of the violent crime. Okay, good. Here's what they include. So assaults, homicide, and sex offenses, rape, molestation, so on, et cetera, et cetera. And here's what they found. They found the increase in these crimes have fallen hardest on black people. All right? I'm just giving you the stats. So if this doesn't pertain to you, if you happen to be a black person listening to this and, Carl is just following what the white man want to say, don't be an idiot, man. If your community is getting hurt, figure out what you can do to help your community and stop knocking the people that are just bringing you the information. It makes no sense to me. But this is what we do in the black community. We just turn on each other. I'm trying to give you information to better the community. Okay, what do we need to do? We need to talk up. We need to talk up fathers. We need neighborhood watch groups. We need men to step up and maybe be a mentor to other young men so they don't turn to a life in the streets. What do we need to do? Instead of, Carl, you're a sellout. Yeah, Uncle, Larry Elder, blah blah blah. Shut up. You're not doing anything to help the black community. For God's sakes. Information, knowledge is power. Remember those old sayings, knowledge is power. I wish they would bring those back. Knowledge is power. If you continue to ignore statistics, facts, truth, you can't do anything to solve the problem. Makes no sense. All right, so again, those violent crime includes assaults, homicide, sexual offenses, and again, sadly, the crimes have fallen hardest on black people, on the black community. So here's some stats. Blacks versus whites from 2011 to 2020. The percentage of violent crime victims who were black increased by 3.2% to reach a peak of 32.7%. So again, the percentage of violent crime victims who were black increased by 3.2% to reach a peak of 32.7%. Again, the latest stats that we have are in 2020. Now, by contrast, here's what you have for the percentage of total victims who were white. The percentage of total victims who were white steadily declined from 69.1% to 64.7%. So you're looking at over a 4% drop in crime when it comes to the white community. All right. So what about Native Americans versus Asians? All right. So for Native Americans and for Asians, the changes were smaller. All right. So for Native Americans, the former group, the percentage increased by 1/3% to compose 1.1% of all victims when it comes to violent crimes happening in the U.S. of A. All right, so the latter the Asian community saw an increase of 0.4% to compose 1.2% of victims in 2018, and that held constant through 2020. So the amount of crime did not increase in the small increase in the Native American community, but the stats remain the same over the last few years with the Asian community. Crime has not grown. All right, so homicide stats unfortunately fall on all ethnic groups. So black rose 2.9% to 54.4% in 2020. White victims, the percentage actually fell 3.5% to 43.3% over the same period. Again, then Native Americans and Asians, the changes were much smaller. For the former Native Americans, the percentage increased by a 0.4% to 1.1. For Asians, the rate increased by a 0.4% to a high of 1.4. And then that was in 2018, and then fell by a 0.4% back to the 2011 rate in 2020. So black victims, or the number of black victims, or the share, increased more than what? Here, let me just read this. The most significant changes, therefore, were the black people represent an increasing share of violent crimes, and white people a smaller share. All right. The truth is, that we're dealing in relatively small percentages. All right, so we're dealing with a small percentage of numbers. When you think, okay, all right, 5%, 5% is a huge amount when you're talking about several 100,000 people. All right, that's a huge amount. But when it's that simple. So here's the problem. The problem is made worse when you consider that African Americans, blacks. I hate using the term African Americans, but I'm reading for this because it's a lot of numbers, and I can't just remember them off the top of my head oftentimes. So, but this is the data. And this is federal crime data, again, for those sheriff departments, police departments across the country that have reported. So for blacks, we only make up 14.2% of the total population, and that number is flawed. I see what Heritage Foundation is trying to do, but what they did was they included multiracial populations who are identifying as black. So okay, I see what they're doing. So maybe, okay, that's fair enough. So if you're biracial, if you're mixed with black, if you're a Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, instead of saying Barack Obama is half white, nobody says that for whatever reason. Barack Obama could claim he's white, but he doesn't. He chooses to say he's black. The same is true for Kamala Harris. So they're considering biracial people in this account, which is fair. Okay. All right. So I see what they did here. All right. But now you got 32.7% of all crime victims and 54% of homicide victims are black. So again, 14.2% of the population, but 32.7% of all violent crimes and all homicide victims are black. I mean, just think about that. So 14% of the population is 14.2. All right. So that's more than triple I mean, that's more than triple. That's almost 4 times the amount. It's 14, yeah, 28, 56. So, yeah, you're almost at, sadly, blacks committing, 14% of the population committing 54.4% of the nation's homicides. That's insane. That is insane. I'm sorry, you can't talk about systemic racism with numbers like this. You can't talk about systemic racism when you won't freaking look in the mirror when it comes to our own community. All right, so now this thing says who's doing it. All right, so I'm going to do a little reading here. All right, with race essentialist rhetoric at a fever pitch, bemoaning the omnipresence of white supremacy, some might be tempted to conclude that the relative decrease in white victims and the relative increase in black victims is attributable to a spike in racial hatred. That hypothesis would suggest that the relative number of white offenders is increasing and the relative number of black offenders is remaining constant or decreasing. In fact, the opposite is true, they argue. After factoring out the cases in which the race of the perpetrator was unknown, the relative share of offenders by racial groups followed a similar trend to the share of victims. All right, so from 2011 to 2020, the percentage of total violent offenders who were white fell from 3.4% to 58%. With respect to homicide, specifically, the percentage fell by an eighth of 1%, so 0.8% to 43.1%. By contrast, over the same period, the percentage of total violent offenders who were black rose 2.4% to 39.4%. And with respect to homicide, the percentage rose 0.3% to 54.7%. And let me say this, you do what you know, and perhaps you do what you see. When you live in the hood, listen, even if you don't want to be a little hood rat, if you live in an environment where you have to protect yourself, sometimes you're going to hang around people you shouldn't, or you're going to become friendly with people you shouldn't. And sometimes you feel like you don't have a choice in the matter. And that's understandable. That is a real concern when you live in the hood. You could be friends with a drug dealer, gangster, whatever, or at least think you are. I would encourage you, if you listen to this podcast, if you're in this situation, to the best of your ability, do something else, do something different. Hang around with positive people. Go to church. Ask your parents to take you to church. Get some friends there. A good Bible-believing church that's not a social justice church that preaches that white people are racist and so on, etc. No, go to a church where people talk about sin and being and being redeemed. They talk about Jesus Christ being able to reconcile with Jesus Christ and being forgiven for your sin and living a new life. You need to be just spiritually fed and just given a new perspective in life. That's what Christ did for me. And I know that he can do the same for you. So the small increase, it says here, hides a more dramatic recent trend because the percentage of black offenders fell several percent from 2011 to 2019. So black on black crime actually decreased from 2011 to 2019. What happened? 2020. BLM has done more damage to the squad as well. Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, all of these people have done more to hurt blacks and to hurt black communities than they've ever done to help the black community. This nonsense that America is systemically racist, that George Floyd was killed because he was a racist or because the cops were racist, except for Derek Chauvin, the other cops that are on trial that should be let free, should be set free. I fear they won't be because of all these woke people in not just in law enforcement, and some cowards, if I'm being honest, in law enforcement, but some of these judges, some of these attorneys, and some of these jurors that are just scared to do the right thing. I understand their fear, but man, if you don't do the right thing when you sit in that juror's box, you mess up, you jack up the whole freaking system, our whole judicial system. You got to do the right thing out there, jurors. Come hell or high water, you got to do the right thing. All right, so black on black crime decreased from 2011, or at least the violent crimes from 2011 to 2019, they skyrocket in 2020. It's insane. So again, these numbers, these are small percentages. These are small changes. But when you consider the surging crime numbers and the fact that blacks make up a small percentage of the population, the implications are huge. I mean, this is sad. So we go from 2011 to 2019. Numbers were fell several percentage points, and then you jump to 2020, and then you look at a jump in violent crimes in the black community, up by 1.2%. The numbers, the percentage seems small, but when you consider blacks again make up a small percentage of the population, 14.2%. If you consider those that are mixed with black or biracial people, it's insane. All right, now here's the stats for Native Americans. As for Native Americans, the percentage of total violent offenders in this category increased by, again, 0.4% to 1.3%. And then for Asians, the percentage increased by 0.3% to 1%. For a homicide, specifically Native American offenders increased by 0.4% to 1.2%. A total of homicide offenders and Asians fell to 0.2% to a total of 0.7% of homicide offenders. All right, so here's some other explanations that the Daily Signal offers. It is possible that trendy race essentialist rhetoric is playing a role in what we are seeing. Domestic studies are needed to establish a clear connection, but there are studies from abroad that suggest race rhetoric may lead to racial violence. That's absolute. I'm sorry. Listen, I know the data isn't there, but let me just give you some ghetto fabulous facts. When you tell a group of people that they are oppressed, and you constantly beat that drum, and you tell them that they cannot get ahead because they are oppressed, you tell them that people that don't share their skin color are their enemies, what the hell do you think they're going to do? Especially when they don't have a father in the home to say, whoa, son, and I'm saying son because obviously men tend to be more violent than women, all right? So, whoa, son, don't do this. Don't go this way. Instead, go this way. Do this. You're good at this. That's what men need. Why do you think so many young black men become so successful in the sports arena? They have skills, they have physical stamina, strength, so on, etc. But then they have that coach or coaches, and they have those mentors that say you can be somebody, but you gotta work hard along the way, and then there's going to be a payoff. And that's why you see so many blacks that make it that make it into professional sports and do such a great job. It's not just the ability; it's the coaching, it's the mentorship, it's the dare I say quasi fatherhood that goes along in the sports community. It's amazing to me. So you damn right, racial rhetoric plays a part in the increase in crime that you see. There's no doubt about it. All right. The increase in black offenders and black victims is reminiscent of the fallout from the Black Power movements of the 1960s. This, according to the historian C. Van Woodward, he recounts that history in his book, The Strange Career of Jim Crow. I had never heard of that book. Now I want to check it out. Woodward observed that radicals began to reject the approach of the, quote, the odd civil rights movement, which called for peace, equality, and integration. The radicals favored racial separatism and black nationalism, and we are back there. He's absolutely right, which gave way to, quote, burst of black violence, disorder, and frustration. The irony of this violence, however, was that it occurred primarily in black neighborhoods, and the main victims were working class black people. Ain't that something? Man, are we repeating history or what? We are repeating history. The trendy race wisdom of today shares similar traits. Like the Black Power movement, it is more focused on calling out and rebuking the supposed omnipresent specter of white supremacy than it is on peace, equality, and integration. As with the riots of the 1960s, the anti-police riots of 2020 caused significant harm to black neighborhoods and black-owned businesses. Additionally, on social media sites associated with these views, violent rhetoric is common. We see that with this guy, again, that shot up the people on the New York City subway, or at the New York City subway station. Ultimately, this column concludes, more research is needed before we can conclude that the present day race essentialist rhetoric is a causal factor in the present increase in black victims and offenders. I'm going to make a bet on that. Of course it is. I appreciate the research these guys are doing, but there's nothing like being or growing up in the hood. You just see it, you know it. That's just the truth. That's just the truth. When you're told that people are racist, you're always skeptical. You think they're against you. That's just the truth. All right. So this article concludes by saying, regardless whether it is caused by race rhetoric, the Minneapolis effect, which is rogue prosecutors, or some combination of them or their things, the spike in crime is hurting a lot of people in black communities, again, are bearing the brunt or the heaviest burden when it comes to violent crime and the crime increase happening across the country. So black people, wake up, speak to your friends, speak to your family. Don't be afraid to share the truth. And again, I just want to reiterate, the vast majority of black people are good, law-abiding, warm-hearted citizens, like family members of mine, like family members of yours. But there's a small element within the black community that is doing a lot of damage, even to law-abiding blacks, and unfortunately, not speaking out. It's causing a problem. It's causing a problem. And these people like Black Lives Matter and all of these wannabe social justice warriors are these social justice warriors that are just calling out cops and systemic racism, white supremacy, spreading all this nonsense. All they're doing is causing more black people to die. It's as simple as that. All right, guys, I hope you've enjoyed today's edition of the podcast. Again, I'm going to remind you to subscribe. SalemPodcastNetwork.com is probably the easiest place to do so. All right, so SalemPodcastNetwork.com, Carl Jackson Show Podcast. Also find me everywhere podcasts are found: Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube. Remember, sometimes we're limited on what we can put on YouTube, but for the stuff that's on there, click the bell. You can get notifications, but a good place to go is Rumble. We always place the videos on rumble.com, so you can check that out. Check out the videos there. Also, follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter at Carl Jackson Show. I'm on Parler as well. I'm playing around with Getter, so I will get up on. I actually do have an account on Getter. I just got to figure out how to work it. I'm just being completely honest with you. So I will be posting on Getter as well. I'm sure more social media to come. I'm also on Instagram. So Carl Jackson Show on Instagram. That's another one I don't play with too much, but I need to. I know that it's powerful. So you can find me there, and I will start being more active on these sites. So you can look forward to that. All right, guys. Until next time, don't grow weary doing good. God bless you. I appreciate you tuning in today.